Tonight, the first topic we explore is not a person or an empire, but a world beneath the soil. A quiet, earthy world filled with forgotten flavours and textures. These are the vegetables once grown by medieval farmers, tended with rough hands and simple tools, harvested not for supermarkets, but for stews in stone hearths and bowls of healing pottage. From bitter greens served to knights recovering from wounds, to root vegetables so hearty they fed entire families through frost and famine. These crops were once essential, and now most of us have never even heard their names. So before you get comfortable, as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy our content. And tell us, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Sometimes our stories are too interesting for sleep, and sometimes we do try to make them a bit boring for bedtime. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for some gentle background noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight. Together. Skirret, the sweet root of forgotten fields. In the quiet soil of medieval Europe, before the potato ever graced the continent, there was skirret, a name barely whispered today, yet once as common in cloister gardens and cottage plots as the leek or the onion. Skirret, Sium caesarum, if you wish to be formal, was a root vegetable, pale and tender, with a naturally sweet, nutty flavour. It was beloved not for its size but for its subtle charm, and it was particularly prized in monastic kitchens where flavour had to come from the land, not from far-off trade. Unlike carrots, which grew as a single taproot, skirret formed a tangled cluster of slender roots, each about the thickness of a pencil. These white roots were peeled, boiled or roasted, and often mashed into a kind of creamy, peppery paste. The flavour, though mild, had depth, something between parsnip and sunchoke, with an earthy sweetness that paired well with garlic, onions and herbs from the same garden. In some recipes, skirret was even candied like fruit or baked into savoury tarts alongside cheese and eggs. But its charm extended beyond the plate. Skirret thrived in damp soil, especially in northern climates, and unlike some finicky vegetables, it didn't demand much of the farmer. It was perennial, meaning it could return year after year, and it could be harvested well into winter, dug up from frozen ground when other crops had long withered. To the medieval farmer, this made skirret not just delicious, but dependable. In many ways, it was the perfect peasant's crop. Yet it was not confined to poor tables. Skirret appears in royal records too, including the garden inventories of medieval monasteries and manor houses. It was mentioned in herbals, praised for its wind-dispelling qualities and digestive aid. Even Henry VIII's gardener is said to have grown it in the royal beds. So what happened to this once-loved root? The arrival of the potato in the 16th century was part of its downfall. Easy to grow, easy to store, and higher in calories, the potato pushed many old vegetables to the margins. Skirret, with its delicate roots and need for peeling, was quietly forgotten. Yet beneath our feet, the seeds of history remain, and sometimes they just need a little light to grow again. Good King Henry, the forgotten green of the cottage wall. In the shadow of stone cottages and along the edges of fields, Good King Henry once reigned, not as a monarch, but as a plant. Known affectionately as poor man's asparagus, this perennial green was a faithful companion to medieval peasants, growing where little else would. Its dark green leaves and tender shoots offered nourishment year after year, needing almost no care in return. Today, few recognise the name, yet in its time, Good King Henry was as vital as bread. The plant's name likely has nothing to do with royalty. Some believe Henry may come from old Germanic roots, meaning home ruler, referencing its closeness to households and its dependable nature. Others suggest it was named after a local folk figure, a protector of the land. Whatever the origin, the name stuck, and the plant became a staple in peasant gardens across Europe, especially in Britain and the Alps. Its most prized parts were the young shoots, which were harvested in early spring and boiled like asparagus. Soft, slightly bitter, and deeply green, these stalks were among the first fresh foods available after a long winter. Later in the season, The large triangular leaves were picked and cooked like spinach, often stirred into potages, lentil stews, or rustic pies. Though not delicate in flavour, they were rich in iron and vitamins, an essential boost for hard-working farmers and their families. But good King Henry was more than just a food source. Its seeds were ground and used medicinally. Its roots were sometimes dried and stored. Even the ash of its burned leaves was used in early soap making. In an era where survival often depended on the utility of every plant, it proved its worth time and time again. Unlike modern vegetables which demand specific conditions and frequent care, good King Henry was low maintenance. Once planted, it returned each year without complaint. It could grow in poor soil, near stables, or along garden fences. Its persistence made it ideal for the medieval lifestyle, one that left little time for tending delicate crops. So why did it disappear? As spinach, chard, and asparagus became widely cultivated and standardized, good King Henry's rough edges made it seem outdated. Its slow germination, bitter taste, and coarse leaves lost favor with gardeners and cooks seeking refinement. But in its prime, it was a silent, green ally, feeding the humble and enduring, quietly, through the centuries. Salsify. The oyster of the garden. Among the frost-hardened beds of the medieval kitchen garden, there grew a root with a peculiar reputation, salsify, often called the oyster plant. Though it never saw the sea, its creamy white flesh was said to hold a taste faintly reminiscent of oysters, especially when boiled in milk or roasted with herbs. To the modern ear, that might sound curious, even suspect. But in a world without mass refrigeration or global food imports, salsify was a prized winter delicacy. This humble root, long and slender with a tough, hairy skin, thrived in cooler climates and poorer soils. It was planted in early spring and left to grow slowly through the summer. By the time winter rolled in, its flavour had deepened and sweetened, becoming most potent after the first frost. This frost, far from being a threat, was actually welcomed. It signalled that the salsify was ready to harvest, tender and full of flavour. For the medieval cook, preparing salsify required patience. The roots had to be scrubbed thoroughly, peeled, and soaked in water to prevent discoloration. Once prepared, they could be boiled, stewed or mashed like parsnips, or used to thicken soups and stews. The texture was soft but satisfying, almost silky, and the taste, though mild, brought a subtle complexity to otherwise bland winter fare. Beyond its culinary uses, salsify also held a place in herbal medicine. Monastic herbals described it as a remedy for snake bites, liver ailments, and even melancholy. Its milky sap was thought to have purifying properties, and its leaves, while not as commonly eaten, could be fed to livestock when food was scarce. Despite its value, salsify was never as widespread as turnips or onions. It remained somewhat of a niche vegetable, grown in smaller patches or in gardens attached to monasteries and manor houses. Its labour-intensive nature and delicacy made it less ideal for mass cultivation, and when newer, hardier vegetables like the potato arrived, salsify was pushed to the fringes of European agriculture. Today, you might still find it in heirloom gardens or tucked away in seed catalogues, but few remember its place in medieval life. Yet for generations long gone, salsify brought a touch of refinement to rough winters, a quiet reminder that even in the hardest seasons, nature offers something tender, if you're willing to dig for it. Alexander's, the ancient herb, that time forgot. Long before parsley and celery dominated our kitchen counters, medieval farmers turned to a plant called Alexander's. With tall, hollow stalks and deep green leaves, Alexander's was once a star of the medieval herb garden. Known for its slightly peppery celery-like flavour, it was used in everything from stews and salads to pickles and medicinal teas. Today, it's nearly vanished from our plates, but in the Middle Ages, it grew along roadsides, in monastery gardens, and beside castle walls, as familiar as thyme or sage. Originally introduced to Britain by the Romans, Alexander's, Smyrnium olusatrum, was considered essential to any cook's garden. The plant could grow nearly 6 feet tall, and every part of it was useful. The leaves added spice to soups, the stems were blanched and eaten like asparagus, the seeds were used as a peppery seasoning, and even the roots were sometimes roasted as a vegetable. It was, in many ways, the Swiss army knife of medieval cooking. One of its most unique qualities was its ability to grow in salty coastal soils, places where other crops struggled. This made it especially valuable in monastic communities near the sea, where self-sufficiency was paramount. Alexanders could be foraged or cultivated, and it provided reliable greens during the hungry gap. The bleak early spring weeks when winter stores had run low, and summer harvests were still months away. Its flavour, while somewhat bitter to modern tastes, was appreciated for its strength. Medieval recipes often lacked the spices we take for granted today. Pepper, nutmeg, and cinnamon were expensive imports, often reserved for the wealthy. For the common folk, Alexander's filled that gap with its bold, aromatic punch. But with the rise of more refined and consistent vegetables, like cultivated celery, Alexander's began to fade from use. Celery had a milder flavour and didn't self-seed so aggressively. Gardeners found it easier to control, and cooks preferred its cleaner taste. Over time, Alexander's was left to the wild, where it still grows along hedgerows and coastal cliffs in parts of Europe. It is a plant of memory now, a ghost of gardens past. Yet to those who once gathered it in woven baskets, who simmered it in pots over open flames, Alexander's was more than a plant. It was a sign of spring, a burst of green after winter's grey, and a taste of something once ordinary, now rare. Scorzonera, the dark root. With a golden heart tucked beneath the soil like a secret, Scorzonera was one of the most intriguing vegetables found in medieval gardens. With its black bark-like skin and creamy white flesh inside, it was sometimes called black salsify, or viper's herb. It looked rough and wild, but once peeled and prepared, it revealed a surprisingly delicate, almost buttery flavour, sweeter than a parsnip, smoother than a carrot. Though often confused with its cousin salsify, Scorzonera had its own loyal following in the Middle Ages, especially among those who believed in its healing powers. The name Scorzonera may come from the old Italian word scorzonera, meaning black bark, a nod to its gnarled appearance. Some believed it could cure snake bites, hence the nickname viper's herb. Apothecaries dried its roots, ground them into powders, and prescribed them as antidotes for venom, plague, and even melancholy. Whether it truly held these powers is unknown, but its reputation spread across Europe, and soon Scorzonera had a place in both kitchen and infirmary. For farmers it was a dependable crop. It grew slowly but steadily, thriving in cool climates and needing little attention once established. Harvesting it required care, as its roots could easily snap, long and fragile, often buried deep in the earth. But those who grew Scorzonera knew it was worth the trouble. After a harsh winter, the promise of its soft, nutty flavour was enough to coax any cook into the garden with a spade. Culinary uses varied by region and rank. In monasteries, Scorzonera was boiled and served with herbs or grains. In noble households, it might be baked into savoury pies or layered in roasted vegetable dishes. Its subtle sweetness made it a flexible ingredient, able to complement meat, fish, or stand on its own. Some medieval chefs even paired it with honey and vinegar to enhance its naturally sweet undertones. Despite its value, Scorzonera eventually faded from popularity. The rise of easier, higher-yield root crops, like potatoes and carrots, pushed it aside. Its tough exterior and need for peeling made it inconvenient for modern tastes. But in the Middle Ages, Scorzonera was more than just food. It was medicine, hope, and warmth in a cold season, a reminder that beneath even the roughest skin, something golden might wait. All it asked was that you dig a little deeper. Medlar. The fruit that had to rot to ripen strange, wrinkled and soft to the touch, the medlar is perhaps one of the most misunderstood fruits ever grown in medieval Europe. It resembled a small brown apple with an open, star-shaped bottom, often earning it the crude nickname open arse in Old English texts. But beyond its odd appearance was a fruit that held a cherished place in medieval cuisine and culture. Unlike most fruits, the medlar had to undergo a process called bletting, a kind of controlled rot, before it became edible. And when it did, it transformed into something soft, sweet, and richly flavoured, like spiced applesauce with a touch of wine. Medlar trees were slow-growing but sturdy, thriving in cooler climates. They were often planted near monasteries, manor orchards, or tucked into the corners of kitchen gardens. The fruit was harvested in late autumn, long after apples and pears were gone, and then stored in straw or on windowsills until it softened. This made the medlar a valuable winter treat, a rare sweetness when most other fruits were long gone. Medieval cooks understood the art of patience, and the medlar rewarded those who waited. Once bletted, the fruit could be eaten with a spoon straight from its skin or mashed and served with cream, wine, or cheese. It also found its way into jellies, sauces, and festive tarts. Some wealthier households added medlar preserves to their winter feasts, pairing the fruit with roasted meats or mulled wine. But the medlar wasn't just culinary, it held symbolic meaning too. Poets and playwrights used it as a metaphor for aging, for hidden sweetness, and for things that appear unlovely, but contain beauty within. Shakespeare mentioned it more than once, often with a wink of earthy humour. It was, in many ways, the perfect medieval symbol. Humble in appearance, slow to mature, but full of depth and richness when treated with care. Over time, as new fruits like oranges, peaches and bananas reached European markets, the medlar lost its place. Its requirement for ripening after harvest made it unfashionable in the age of convenience. But in its day, the medlar was a fruit of contemplation, one that reminded medieval people that time, decay and patience could yield surprising rewards. And perhaps that beauty doesn't always look perfect at first glance. Rampion, the root behind a fairy tale. In the quiet corners of medieval herb gardens and cottage plots, rampion once grew as both food and folklore. With its soft, edible leaves and slender white roots, rampion was a favourite of peasant families and monastic gardeners alike. But for many today, the name is most familiar not from old recipes, but from the story of Rapunzel, the fairy tale girl named after this very plant. Rampion, also called Campanula rapunculus, was a biennial herb whose young leaves were eaten like spinach and whose roots were crisp, tender, and mildly sweet, almost like a delicate radish or parsnip. In spring and early summer, the plant offered nutritious greens, and by late autumn, it provided a small but satisfying root vegetable. For medieval families with little land and even less money, rampion was a gift, easy to grow, resilient, and entirely edible from leaf to root. It thrived in ordinary garden soil and didn't need rich compost or careful tending. This made it ideal for household plots, often grown alongside turnips, leeks, and herbs. The leaves were gathered while young and tender, stirred into soups, or eaten raw with vinegar and salt. The roots, once thick enough, were pulled up in late fall and roasted, boiled, or eaten raw in salads. In lean years, rampion was one of the plants that helped bridge the gap between the last of the winter stores and the first spring crops. Its gentle flavour and versatility made it popular, but so did its symbolism. Rampion's association with fertility, craving, and desire appears in early folklore, particularly in the Germanic regions where the Rapunzel tale was born. In the story, a pregnant woman craves rampion from a witch's garden, setting off a chain of events that leads to her daughter's imprisonment and eventual rescue. That the plant played such a pivotal role in a tale about yearning, patience, and transformation reflects the way people once regarded humble vegetables, not merely as food, but as forces of nature. As centuries passed, rampion faded from common use. It was overshadowed by faster-growing crops and greens that were easier to harvest in bulk. Today, it's a rarity, more likely to be found in a storybook than a soup pot. But once it grew behind every cottage, quiet, green, and full of life. A plant of hunger and healing, of daily meals and bedtime stories. A root that once fed both the body and the imagination. Chervil root, the delicate flavour of monastic gardens. Nestled in the shaded corners of medieval gardens, especially those tended by monks and herbalists, grew a pale and slender root known as chervil root. Though it shares its name with the more familiar chervil herb, known for its fern-like leaves and mild anise-like flavour, the root variety, Cherophyllum bulbosum, was its own distinct treasure. Delicate in taste and texture, chervil root offered medieval cooks a refined option in a world where many vegetables were coarse, bitter or starchy. Visually unremarkable, the root resembled a thin, stubby carrot with light brown skin and ivory flesh. Its flavour, however, was anything but plain. When boiled or roasted, chervil root developed a sweet, nutty, almost chestnut-like taste with a subtle hint of licorice. This mild, aromatic profile made it highly prized in monastic kitchens, where food was not only meant to nourish, but also to soothe body and soul. Unlike many root vegetables, chervil root required patience. It germinated slowly, often taking several weeks to sprout, and had a long growing season, sometimes lasting up to 9 months. Because of this, it was not widely grown on large farms or by hurried peasants. Instead, it was cultivated in controlled garden beds, often by monks or careful gardeners who had the time and knowledge to nurture it. In the right conditions, the reward was worth it. A root that was soft on the tongue, gentle on the stomach, and satisfying in flavour. Culinarily, chervil root was versatile. It was commonly boiled and served with butter, added to broths for subtle sweetness, or mashed like turnips. Some early recipes even included it in spiced cakes or root puddings, paired with honey and cinnamon for festive meals. But it wasn't just a food. In herbal medicine, it was used to ease digestion, reduce fevers, and improve circulation. Yet, like many forgotten vegetables, chervil root fell victim to the industrialization of agriculture. Its slow growth and specific needs didn't suit large-scale farming. Other roots, potatoes, carrots, and parsnips, offered bigger yields and faster returns. Today, chervil root is almost a ghost, a fleeting presence in old seed catalogues or among the shelves of heritage plant collectors. But in the hushed gardens of medieval Europe, where quiet hands coaxed life from the earth, chervil root was a reminder that gentleness could grow even in the hardest soil. Sea kale, the ocean's hidden vegetable. In windswept villages perched along medieval Europe's jagged coasts, where salt and sea ruled the land, a curious plant took root: sea kale. With thick, bluish-green leaves and stout ivory stems, sea kale, Cramba maritima, was once foraged from rocky shorelines, cherished for its rich taste and resilience. Long before it was cultivated in inland gardens, coastal farmers and foragers gathered it from the wild, seeing in its hardy form both nourishment and novelty. Sea kale wasn't like the other greens of the time. Its flavour was something between cabbage and asparagus, earthy, salty, and slightly nutty, but it was the plant's early spring shoots that brought the most excitement. Blanched under clay pots or heaps of sand to keep them pale and tender, these ivory-coloured stems emerged crisp and succulent, providing one of the first fresh vegetables of the year. At a time when most were still eating dried beans or stored roots, sea kale signalled renewal. Medieval cooks, especially in fishing communities, boiled or steamed the shoots, often serving them alongside fish or mixing them with butter and herbs. In monastic kitchens, where coastal gardens tried to mimic the conditions of the shore, sea kale was grown in raised beds near salt-rich soil. It became a quiet delicacy, not flashy or exotic, but deeply nourishing and deeply seasonal. Its roots were just as impressive, long, thick, and edible, though tougher than the shoots. Some herbal texts noted their use in poultices or boiled tonics for internal cleansing. The plant's leaves, wide and ruffled, were sometimes used like cabbage greens, though their tough texture made them more suitable for long stewing. Despite its value, sea kale remained largely a regional crop, limited to the coast and its curious conditions. Inland, few knew how to grow it properly. Its need for sandy, well-drained soil and cold winters made it unsuitable for much of Europe's farmland. As time passed, sea kale was nudged aside by more standardized crops. But for those who lived by the sea, it was more than a vegetable. It was part of the rhythm of life. Its arrival each spring meant the sea was calming, the earth was warming, and better days were ahead. Today, it survives in a few heirloom gardens and coastal fields, a relic of a time when even the most rugged landscapes offered quiet abundance, if you knew where and how to look. Horseradish, the fiery root of medieval remedies and feasts. Beneath the damp soil of medieval herb gardens, a pungent root grew, fierce in flavour, sharp in scent, and powerful in both medicine and the kitchen. This was horseradish, a root that could clear sinuses, wake the sluggish, and transform simple meats into fiery feasts. In a time without chili peppers or wasabi, horseradish was one of the few ingredients that could deliver true heat, and it earned its place in both humble kitchens and elite banquets. Horseradish, Armoracea rusticana, is not a subtle vegetable. When freshly grated, its white flesh releases volatile oils so potent they can bring tears to the eyes. This made it a valued condiment long before refrigeration, when strong flavours were used to preserve or mask the scent of aging meat. Boiled beef, salted fish, and smoked pork all benefited from a spoonful of horseradish mash, often mixed with vinegar, honey, or ground mustard seeds. But medieval people didn't just use horseradish for its taste. It was deeply respected for its medicinal power. Monks and herbalists documented its use in treating everything from rheumatism and indigestion to coughs and congestion. Grated root was steeped in vinegar and taken as a tonic, or made into compresses to relieve joint pain. Even the leaves were used in poultices, believed to draw out toxins from the skin. It was a rugged plant, almost too rugged. Once planted, horseradish spread aggressively, its thick roots pushing deep into the soil and resisting removal. This wild nature made it both a blessing and a nuisance in medieval gardens. Farmers often kept it in separate corners, allowing it to grow undisturbed, knowing it would return each year without fail. Its role in feasts was especially notable during winter and spring, when heavy meats needed cutting and fresh herbs were scarce. Horseradish brought brightness and heat to otherwise dense meals. It also played a role in early seasonal rituals and religious traditions, often associated with purification and rebirth, especially around Easter in Central Europe. Though still known today, horseradish has largely been reduced to a condiment in modern cuisine. But in the Middle Ages, it was more than a fiery flavour. It was a cure, a challenge, and a mark of culinary boldness. For the medieval farmer, it was a root that reminded them the earth could bite back, and sometimes that was exactly what was needed. Parcelle, the lost hybrid of two kitchen staples. In the medieval garden, where every plant had to earn its place through usefulness and hardiness, there once grew a quiet hybrid, Parcelle. As the name suggests, Parcelle was a natural blend of parsley and celery, sharing traits with both yet standing apart as its own modest treasure. While today it's nearly unknown, in its time, Parcelle offered cooks and healers a double blessing, the aromatic leaves of parsley with the crisp stalks of young celery. Parcelle thrived in the same kind of well-drained, fertile beds that monks and farmers used for their everyday herbs. Its leaves were finely serrated and dark green, much like flat-leaf parsley, but with a slightly fuller body. The stems were firm and mildly crunchy, not quite as thick as celery, but sturdier than parsley's usual thin stems. This made the plant incredibly versatile. You could chop it finely to flavour stews, toss the stalks into broths for depth, or chew it raw as a digestive aid. In an age where imported spices were rare and costly, Parcelle's ability to add complexity to food with just a handful of leaves made it a favoured herb. It was frequently used in potages, lentil dishes, or mixed with barley and leeks in rustic countryside meals. In noble kitchens, where flavour mattered as much as presentation, Parcelle provided both, delicate flavour and attractive garnish in one plant. Its usefulness didn't end in the kitchen. Parcelle, like its parsley and celery parents, was valued medicinally. Monastic herbals described its leaves as cleansing and warming, used to stimulate appetite or relieve water retention. It was chewed after meals to freshen breath and soothe the stomach, and infusions were made to aid digestion and reduce swelling. Despite its promise, parsley never reached the widespread popularity of either of its parent plants. As time passed and cultivated celery grew into a larger, more tender variety, parsley was gradually forgotten. It was too subtle for mass farming and too delicate to survive in rougher soils without care. Gardeners stopped saving its seeds. Recipes stopped mentioning it. Today, it survives only in obscure botanical texts and heirloom seed collections, a shadow of a flavour once known by hand and taste, not by name. But in the medieval world, parsley was a small miracle, 2 plants in one, grown not for flash, but for flavour, comfort, and quiet utility. Lovage, the spicy giant of the medieval herb garden. Standing tall like a green sentinel at the back of the garden, lovage was one of the boldest and most useful plants in the medieval farmer's world. With thick, hollow stems and glossy, celery-like leaves, lovage, Levisticum officinale, wasn't just a flavourful herb. It was a culinary powerhouse, a medicinal mainstay, and in many households, a leafy guardian that returned year after year. In taste, lovage was intense, sharp, spicy, and aromatic, like a concentrated blend of celery and parsley with hints of anise. It added immediate depth to even the simplest pottage or stew. Just a few leaves could transform a pot of barley and onions into something that tasted far richer than the ingredients suggested. Both peasants and noble cooks appreciated its strength. It stretched thin supplies and flavoured meats, grains, and even cheese-based dishes with an assertiveness few other herbs could match. Cooks used every part of the plant. The young leaves were chopped and mixed with beans or grains. The stalks, often blanched, were eaten like celery or used to stir soups, infusing the pot with flavour. Even the seeds were gathered and ground, used like fennel or caraway in breads and herbal liqueurs. And the roots, thick and gnarled, were boiled into tonics or grated into healing pastes. In monastic medicine, lovage was seen as a warming herb, stimulating digestion and soothing sore throats. It was prescribed for everything from kidney troubles to flatulence. A tea made from lovage seeds or roots was believed to ease menstrual pain and calm nervous energy. Its pungent aroma also made it a natural air freshener. Sprigs were sometimes laid out in kitchens or carried on one's person to ward off illness. Lovage grew tall, often up to 6 feet, and came back stronger each year. Its perennial nature made it a favourite among time-strapped farmers who valued crops that could fend for themselves. But this very boldness may have led to its decline. As gardening trends shifted toward milder, more controlled flavours, lovage was gradually replaced by gentler herbs like parsley and chervil. Still, in the world of medieval gardens, lovage held a place of honour. It was large, loud, and unapologetically flavourful. A plant that asked for little and gave back in abundance. In a time of scarcity, that made all the difference. Fat hen, the wild green, that fed the fields. In the margins of ploughed land, along hedgerows, and between rows of cultivated crops, a wild green thrived. Fat hen, also known as lamb's quarters or Chenopodium album. To modern gardeners it may look like a weed, and indeed many pull it up without a second thought. But to medieval farmers, fat hen was no nuisance. It was a free, abundant, and highly nutritious gift from the earth, one that helped feed the poor and supplement lean harvests when cultivated greens were scarce. Fat hen wasn't usually planted on purpose. It appeared naturally in disturbed soil, especially in manured fields or near livestock pens, hence its name. The leaves were soft, triangular, and lightly dusted with a silvery bloom that made the plant shimmer slightly in the sun. Its taste was mild, slightly nutty, and not unlike spinach, which made it incredibly versatile in the medieval kitchen. In country cottages, it was common for peasants to gather fat hen during the growing season and boil it into soups or mash it with barley or peas. Because the plant was so easy to identify and abundant, even children could forage for it. It required no tools, no seeds, and no land ownership, just a pair of hands and a bit of local knowledge. It was the people's green. The nutritional value of fat hen was also impressive. It was rich in iron, calcium, and vitamins A and C, a much-needed boost in times when diets were often repetitive and meat was scarce. Its leaves, stems, and even seeds were edible. The seeds, in particular, were tiny and protein-rich, sometimes ground into flour or added to gruel in famine years. Beyond its role as food, fat hen was also used medicinally. Herbalists recommended it as a gentle laxative, a digestive aid, and even a poultice for soothing insect bites. Monks sometimes included it in their herbals under the category of useful weeds, plants that, while not noble or exotic, earned their place through sheer dependability. Eventually, as farming became more controlled and wild spaces shrank, fat hen was pushed to the margins. But in the medieval era, it flourished quietly beside the plough and the hearth, reminding all who gathered it that not every crop needed planting, and not every blessing came with a price. Fat hen was freedom, wild, generous, and always near. Cram, the wild cabbage of cliff and field. Before the orderly rows of modern cabbage, broccoli, and kale, there was cram, a wild, untamed ancestor that clung to Europe's cliffsides and rocky hills. Known more fully as Crambe maritima, or wild cabbage, this hardy plant didn't demand much, and it gave even in the most unforgiving terrain. To medieval farmers, especially those in coastal regions, cram was a gift from the edge of the world, a resilient green with bitter leaves that softened beautifully with the right preparation. Unlike cultivated cabbages, cram wasn't bred for sweetness or bulk. Its leaves were thick, tough, and often tinged with bluish silver, giving the plant an almost ghostly appearance against the grey stones of the coast. But its resilience was its strength. It could survive salt spray, cold winds, and nutrient-poor soils. While other crops withered in harsh conditions, cram endured. Farmers and foragers alike valued its large outer leaves, which were boiled or stewed into hearty meals, especially during the spring when other vegetables had yet to mature. Though raw cram was bitter and fibrous, long cooking tamed its intensity, and when paired with onions, leeks, or fatty bits of pork, it became a staple of survival. In lean seasons, cram meant the difference between hunger and nourishment. Its roots, too, were edible, thick and starchy, though less flavourful than the leaves. These were sometimes dried and stored, ground into coarse meal, or fermented into early forms of vegetable preserve. And like many medieval plants, cram had its place in the world of folk medicine. Herbal texts noted it as a remedy for digestive troubles and a way to cleanse the humours, language typical of medieval health theory. Despite its practicality, cram was never truly domesticated during the Middle Ages. It remained on the fringes, both literally and culturally, growing on cliffs, dunes, and forgotten borders. It was wild food, associated with poverty and necessity, not refinement or celebration. Still, it fed generations of coastal dwellers who learned to trust in its stubborn presence. Cram was not a showy plant, nor an easy one, but it was honest. It asked nothing but space to grow and rewarded those who dared to look beyond the field's edge. In a world ruled by seasons and struggle, cram was quiet proof that even in bitter soil, life could thrive. Turnip greens, the overlooked crown of a humble root. When most think of the turnip, they picture the round, white and purple root pulled from the soil, a staple of peasant stews, animal feed, and wartime rations. But in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just the root that mattered. The real treasure, especially in early spring, was above the ground, the turnip greens. Often overlooked today, these leafy tops were once a valued vegetable in their own right, feeding hungry mouths when the fields were still bare and the winter stores nearly gone. Turnips were among the most widely grown vegetables in medieval Europe. Easy to cultivate, fast to grow, and able to thrive in poor soil, they provided a reliable food source for both people and livestock. But while the roots were stored or boiled, the leafy tops, harvested when still young and tender, were cooked fresh and eaten with great appreciation. These greens were often the first taste of spring, offering a burst of colour and nutrition after the grey monotony of winter. Turnip greens were typically gathered while the root was still growing. Boiled, sautéed, or stewed, they brought a slightly bitter, peppery bite that complemented the blandness of grains or root vegetables. In rustic households, they were added to barley porridge, mashed with beans, or mixed into broths. In more refined kitchens, they might be flavoured with vinegar, garlic, or bits of preserved meat. Rich in iron, calcium, and vitamin C, turnip greens were not only tasty but medicinal. Monks and healers often recommended them to clean the blood or strengthen the body after illness. They were believed to help digestion, restore energy, and even purify the spirit after Lent's long fasting period. The greens were also used in poultices and compresses, applied to bruises and minor wounds, a reminder that food and medicine often shared the same garden bed. Despite their utility, turnip greens began to fade from favour as more delicate and specialised greens, like spinach and lettuce, gained popularity. Modern agriculture bred turnips for larger roots, often at the expense of their leafy tops. What was once prized became compost. But in the medieval world, nothing went to waste. Turnip greens were a bridge between seasons, a signal of renewal, and a meal in themselves. They were proof that even the humblest crop could offer a feast, if you only looked a little higher than the ground. In the summer of 1631, the Mughal Empire trembled not from war, but from heartbreak. Emperor Shah Jahan, ruler of a vast and powerful dominion, suffered a personal loss so profound it left an indelible scar on history. His beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, died giving birth to their 14th child. She was not only his consort, but his confidant, his spiritual companion, and the light of his court. Overcome by grief, Shah Jahan withdrew from public life for months. Witnesses claimed his hair turned white from sorrow, and his once vibrant demeanour dulled to silence. But from this deep mourning, something extraordinary was conceived, an idea not of war or conquest, but of timeless beauty. The emperor vowed to build a monument so perfect, so serene, that it would forever stand as a testament to his love for Mumtaz. It would be her eternal resting place, and through it, her memory would never fade. This idea would become the Taj Mahal, not merely a tomb, but an architectural expression of eternal devotion. Shah Jahan spared no expense. He envisioned a structure that would reflect the very heavens, rising in pure white marble, as if untouched by time or sorrow. He imagined a garden that would symbolize paradise, a dome that would mimic the celestial sphere, and symmetry so flawless it would mirror the divine order of the cosmos. Every element would be intentional, poetic, and sacred. To bring this vision to life, he summoned the greatest minds and hands of the empire and beyond. Architects from Persia, artisans from the Ottoman Empire, calligraphers from Baghdad, and masons from across India. It would be a union of cultures, much like the Mughal court itself, and it would take more than 2 decades to complete. Yet even before the first stone was laid, the Taj Mahal existed, in the mind of a grieving emperor who transformed his anguish into art. His vision wasn't just of a mausoleum, but of an earthly paradise where love could defy time and memory could be carved in stone. From Shah Jahan's sorrow came one of humanity's most enduring wonders, a marble promise whispered through centuries. She was loved. She is remembered. Behind the elegance of the Taj Mahal lies the genius of thousands, a silent army of architects, engineers, artisans and labourers whose skills shaped Shah Jahan's sorrow into stone. At the helm of this immense undertaking was Ustad Ahmad Lahori, widely believed to be the chief architect. A Persian-trained master, Lahori was more than just a builder. He was a visionary, capable of translating abstract ideas like devotion, grief, and paradise into architectural form. But he was not alone. The Taj Mahal was a fusion of expertise drawn from across the Mughal Empire and beyond. Shah Jahan gathered specialists from the far corners of his realm: Turkish dome designers, Persian garden planners, Indian stonecutters, and Central Asian tile masters. It is said that over 20,000 workers laboured on the site, and more than 1,000 elephants hauled materials from distant lands. The Mughal treasury bore the weight of the costs, but to Shah Jahan, no sum was too great for love. Each artisan brought a piece of the world with them. From Persia came calligraphers who would inscribe verses from the Quran across the marble surfaces in elegant black script. From Bukhara and Samarkand came inlay artists who would press semi-precious stones, lapis lazuli, jade, turquoise and carnelian, into white marble in floral designs that seemed to bloom from the stone. From Rajasthan and Gujarat came the finest masons, with years of experience carving and polishing the hard, translucent marble known as Makrana stone. And yet, even with such a vast array of talents, the project maintained an astonishing unity of vision. This harmony was possible because of meticulous planning. The architects employed complex geometrical calculations, scaled blueprints, and full-sized templates. Every part, from the base platform to the minarets to the central dome, had to be designed with perfect proportionality and symmetry. The result was not just a building, but a masterpiece of collaboration, a synthesis of architectural traditions and technical mastery. While Shah Jahan may have been the soul of the Taj Mahal, these builders were its hands. Without them, his grief might have faded into silence. But through their labour, his mourning became a marvel. A palace of sorrow turned into a poem of light, shadow, and enduring love. Long before the glistening marble walls of the Taj Mahal rose to the sky, the work began deep below, with a foundation that had to support not just the weight of stone, but the burden of memory, empire, and eternity. The site chosen was along the Yamuna River in Agra, its flowing waters symbolizing the eternal stream of paradise. But the proximity to the river also posed a challenge: how to ensure stability in soft, potentially shifting ground. Engineers devised a solution that was both ingenious and bold. They created a deep stone platform, reinforced with layers of rubble and well foundations, a kind of floating base that would distribute the immense weight of the mausoleum and its surrounding structures. A series of brick wells were filled with compacted stone and rubble, acting like anchors, while large wooden platforms tied everything together. This method not only stabilized the soil, but protected the monument from the erosion and seasonal flooding of the Yamuna. Once the foundation was secure, attention turned to the materials. The most iconic of these was the luminous white marble, quarried from Makrana in Rajasthan, over 300 kilometers away. This marble was prized for its purity, translucence, and ability to reflect light, a choice as symbolic as it was practical. It gave the Taj Mahal its heavenly glow, changing hues with the sun: pink at dawn, pearly white at noon, golden at dusk, and silver by moonlight. But the marble was only part of the story. Red sandstone formed the structural core of many surrounding buildings. Semi-precious stones from across the known world were brought in for inlay: jade and crystal from China, turquoise from Tibet, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, onyx from Persia, and even sapphires and rubies from Sri Lanka. These were used to create the intricate floral mosaics that adorned the walls, floors, and ceilings. Transporting these materials required immense coordination. Elephant caravans, ox-drawn carts, and river barges created a logistical web stretching across continents. Artisans set up workshops right on the construction grounds, carving, polishing, and fitting stones with painstaking precision. Every material in the Taj Mahal, from the smallest gemstone to the vast marble slabs, was chosen with care, not just for beauty, but for meaning. The very bones of the monument were selected and arranged to whisper love through architecture, to hold sorrow in stone, and to endure across the centuries. Crowning the Taj Mahal is its most iconic feature, the great central dome. towering nearly 73 meters above ground, the dome is both a marvel of engineering and a symbol of celestial perfection. It rises from the center of the tomb, like a full moon suspended above the earth, a visual anchor that draws the eye upward and inspires awe from every angle. For the Mughal builders, the dome was more than decoration. It was a metaphor for the heavens, the cosmic canopy under which love, death, and eternity unite. The dome's design follows the classic Persian double dome technique. This means it has two shells, an inner dome visible from inside the tomb chamber, and a larger outer dome that dominates the skyline. The inner shell preserves the correct proportions within the space, while the outer shell creates grandeur when viewed from the gardens and afar. Between the two lies a hollow chamber that both lightens the structure's weight and enhances its acoustic resonance. Constructed of marble and crowned with a gilded finial, the dome was a test of balance and symmetry. Engineers had to ensure it sat perfectly atop the central chamber's octagonal drum, distributing its massive weight evenly without warping the structure below. To do this, they used intricate calculations and a series of support arches hidden within the drum. The outer dome was carefully tapered, its silhouette flaring gently before narrowing to a perfect point. A shape that mirrored the geometry of a lotus bud, a sacred symbol in both Hindu and Islamic art. Atop the dome is the kalash, a brass finial inlaid with gold that combines Hindu and Islamic motifs. Below, 4 smaller domed kiosks, or chhatris, frame the central dome, adding visual harmony and balance. These smaller domes echo the main one, reinforcing the architectural rhythm and enhancing the monument's majestic skyline. Inside, the echo chamber of the inner dome was designed to amplify the sound of prayers or whispered verses. The acoustics are so finely tuned that a single spoken word can reverberate softly across the chamber, as if the tomb itself breathes. The dome of the Taj Mahal is not just a structural achievement. It is a sculpted sky, a visual poem written in stone. It turns grief into beauty, and sorrow into something that rises, eternally, toward the divine. The Taj Mahal is often admired for its beauty, but beneath that beauty lies an invisible language, one of geometry, symmetry, and sacred proportion. Every inch of the monument is governed by precise mathematical planning, reflecting not just architectural genius, but a deep philosophical belief that harmony in structure mirrors harmony in the cosmos. For the Mughals, symmetry was sacred. It was order amidst chaos, eternity within time. At the heart of the Taj Mahal's layout is the principle of bilateral symmetry, a perfect mirror-image balance on either side of the central axis. The mausoleum, the reflecting pools, the flanking mosques and guest pavilions, even the surrounding gardens, are laid out with an exactness that feels almost supernatural. This symmetry isn't just horizontal. It extends vertically as well, in the dome, the minarets, and the raised marble platform that elevates the tomb above all else. The mausoleum itself is a square within a square, following the hasht bihisht, 8 paradise chambers, floor plan often used in Islamic architecture. The central chamber is surrounded by 4 smaller rooms, all perfectly proportioned and aligned. From the massive marble screen to the inlaid flooring patterns, geometric motifs repeat and echo in a seamless rhythm. Circles, octagons, and star shapes flow across the walls and ceilings, symbolizing unity, the infinite, and the divine. Even the minarets, towering at the 4 corners of the platform, lean slightly outward. This was not a flaw, but an intentional design choice, made so that if they ever collapsed, they would fall away from the tomb rather than onto it. Yet their placement is mathematically precise, framing the tomb like punctuation around a sacred verse. The gardens, too, are part of this architectural script. Inspired by Persian charbagh, 4-part gardens, they divide space into perfect quadrants, symbolizing the Quranic vision of paradise, flowing water, blooming flora, and divine order. The central water channel reflects the image of the Taj, creating a literal and symbolic mirror of the structure's perfection. Through this sacred geometry, the Taj Mahal becomes more than a building. It becomes a map of the universe, a manifestation of love brought into balance with the eternal. Each line, each angle, each pattern whispers the same message: that in perfect order lies transcendence, and that love, when shaped by symmetry, becomes divine. As you approach the Taj Mahal, your eyes are drawn not only to its marble mass and majestic dome, but to something more delicate: the black script that winds around its arched entrances, like poetry carved from shadow. This is calligraphy, and on the Taj Mahal, it isn't mere ornamentation. It is sacred language, eternal verse, and a visual bridge between the earthly and the divine. The calligraphy was crafted by Amanat Khan, a master calligrapher from Persia, and it features passages from the Quran, carefully chosen to reflect themes of judgment, paradise, and divine mercy. One of the most striking inscriptions found over the main gateway reads, "O soul, thou art at rest. Return to the Lord at peace with him, and he at peace with you." These words were not simply written, they were inlaid into the marble using pietra dura, a method of embedding black marble or onyx into white stone to create a permanent, unweathered contrast. The size of the lettering was also an optical feat. As the text ascends the facade, the letters increase in size to account for perspective, ensuring that to a viewer standing on the ground, the script appears uniform. It's a subtle design that speaks to the monument's mathematical precision and visual harmony. But calligraphy was only one part of the Taj Mahal's intricate surface artistry. The walls, floors, and even ceilings are covered in breathtaking pietra dura inlay, a mosaic technique using cut and fitted semi-precious stones to form intricate floral and geometric designs. Artisans from Central Asia and India were brought in to execute these masterpieces. They embedded lapis lazuli, carnelian, jasper, mother of pearl, and turquoise into the marble with astonishing precision. Floral motifs dominate, not random decorations, but symbolic representations of paradise. Tulips, lilies, and narcissus blossoms form symmetrical patterns that bloom across the marble surfaces. Each flower is a reflection of life, death, and rebirth, themes central to both Islamic mysticism and Mughal aesthetic philosophy. Together, the calligraphy and inlay work transform the Taj Mahal into a book of stone. Every letter, every petal, every shimmer of colour tells a story. It is not just a tomb, but a sacred manuscript, not written in paper and ink, but carved into eternity with shadow, light, and love. Framing the Taj Mahal with poised elegance stand 4 slender minarets, tall, cylindrical towers rising at each corner of the marble platform. At first glance, they might appear ornamental, merely symmetrical accessories to the main tomb. But these minarets are far more than decorative. They are guardians, timekeepers, architectural stabilizers, and subtle declarations of spiritual intent. Each minaret stands over 40 meters tall, tapering gracefully as it ascends. At the top of each is a small domed pavilion, or chhatri, where a muezzin might traditionally call the faithful to prayer. Though no such calls echo from the Taj Mahal today, these towers preserve the sacred language of mosque architecture, aligning the structure with Islamic traditions even though the mausoleum itself is not a mosque. Structurally, the minarets serve a dual function. Aesthetically, they frame the tomb in perfect balance, reinforcing the overall symmetry of the complex. From a distance, their vertical reach draws the eye upward, guiding viewers from the earthbound gardens to the sky-tipped dome. But they also have a clever engineering purpose. They were deliberately constructed to lean slightly outward from the central tomb. This subtle tilt means that in the event of an earthquake, the minarets would collapse away from the mausoleum, protecting its delicate core. Their construction reflects the same precision and care lavished on the rest of the complex. Made from the same gleaming Makrana marble, the minarets are segmented by balconies that allow for visual breaks and access points. Each level is marked by intricate carvings and bordered with jali screens, perforated marble that filters light and air. merging form with function. These minarets also serve as time markers within the monument's broader spiritual narrative. Like the four cardinal directions, they orient the visitor in space, suggesting the completeness of the Taj, a building that exists in perfect alignment with both earthly geometry and heavenly ideals. In this way, the minarets subtly echo the Islamic concept of Tawheed, the unity of all things under one divine order. They do not shout, and they do not dominate. They stand watch, silent and unmoving, century after century. In their quiet strength and slender grace, they embody the very essence of the Taj Mahal, devotion held in stillness, eternity made visible in marble. As you pass through the grand gateway and catch your first full glimpse of the Taj Mahal, it is not just the marble that leaves you breathless, it is the space around it. Sprawling before the tomb is a meticulously designed garden, serene and symmetrical, carved into four perfect quadrants by reflecting pools and walkways. This is the Charbagh, a Persian-inspired layout symbolizing paradise itself, not simply a place to rest, but a vision of eternity in bloom. The concept of the Charbagh has deep roots in Islamic art and culture. Derived from ancient Persian garden design, it divides space into four parts, usually representing the four rivers of paradise described in the Quran, of water, milk, wine, and honey. At the heart of this layout stands the tomb, positioned as the spiritual center, the soul's destination in the afterlife. But Shah Jahan's Taj Mahal garden made a subtle and revolutionary change. Traditionally, in Charbagh designs, the tomb is located at the center. Here, however, it is placed at the northern edge, along the banks of the Yamuna River. Scholars suggest this was to allow the tomb to be reflected endlessly in the river, symbolizing the soul's passage beyond this world into the eternal flow of divine presence. The garden itself was planted with cypress trees, symbolizing death and eternity, and flowering trees like pomegranate and jasmine, representing life and renewal. Beds of herbs, roses, and flowering shrubs lined the paths, their scents rising gently with the morning mist. The sound of water flowing through aqueducts and fountains added another layer of tranquility, a reminder of the divine harmony this space was meant to evoke. At the centre of the garden is a large marble tank, the Haud al-Kauthar, the pool of abundance, named after a celestial river mentioned in Islamic tradition. Its mirror-like surface reflects the image of the Taj Mahal, as if the heavens themselves were holding the monument in stillness. These gardens were not for strolling, but for contemplation. They were places to prepare the soul, to remember the eternal, and to experience beauty not as luxury, but as truth. In this quiet landscape of symmetry and scent, Shah Jahan made his love story bloom, not just in stone, but in soil. For all its splendor and symmetry, the Taj Mahal carries an air of mystery, a sense that something deeper lies beneath its surface, waiting to be uncovered. Beyond the craftsmanship and calculation, hidden within its marble walls and silent chambers, are legends and secrets passed down for centuries. Some are rooted in fact, others in myth, but together they add layers of intrigue to this monument of love. One of the most persistent tales is that of Shah Jahan's second, Black Mausoleum. According to legend, he planned to build an identical tomb in black marble across the Yamuna River, where he would eventually be laid to rest, facing Mumtaz forever. A bridge of silver or black stone would connect the two. But before the project could begin, Shah Jahan was overthrown by his own son, Aurangzeb, and imprisoned in Agra Fort. From his cell, it's said he gazed at the Taj Mahal until the end of his days, never completing his dream. Yet, archaeologists have never found definitive evidence of a foundation for the Black Taj. Some believe the myth arose from the reflection of the white mausoleum in the dark waters of the Yamuna, a ghostly mirror of what might have been. Others see it as symbolic, a poetic way to express the incompleteness of a life interrupted by betrayal. Another mystery lies beneath the cenotaphs. While the central chamber displays the ornate false tombs of Mumtaz and Shah Jahan, their true graves lie in a simple crypt directly below. These real tombs are unadorned and modest, in keeping with Islamic tradition, a sharp contrast to the grandeur above, and a reminder that death, in the end, strips all things bare. Then there are the architectural anomalies, staircases that lead nowhere, sealed chambers beneath the platform, and missing inscriptions scholars have yet to decode. Some speculate these were part of a larger plan left unfinished, others suggest they were sealed off for spiritual reasons or structural safety. And while many believe the legend that artisans had their hands cut off to prevent the Taj Mahal from ever being replicated, there's no historical evidence. Only the echo of a ruler's devotion taken to imagined extremes. In the end, the Taj Mahal's greatest secret may be this: that it continues to whisper stories in silence, not because it hides the truth, but because love, the kind that built it, is never finished. Long before the invention of written language, cities, or organized religion, early humans found a way to speak through color. Some of the oldest evidence of art dates back over 100,000 years, and at the heart of this visual expression was ochre, a naturally occurring pigment formed from iron oxide-rich minerals. In red, yellow, and brown hues, ochre became the first palette of the human spirit. The oldest known use of ochre comes from the Blombos Cave in South Africa, where archaeologists discovered pieces of ochre engraved with geometric designs, dating back nearly 75,000 years. Nearby were grinding tools and shell containers that suggest early humans weren't just using ochre randomly. They were mixing it, storing it, and applying it with purpose. These were the first painters, alchemists of earth and fire. Across continents and eras, ochre appears as a constant in prehistoric art. In the famed caves of Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, red ochre formed the outlines of bison, deer, and human figures. These images weren't just decorative, they were ritualistic, symbolic, deeply tied to survival and spirituality. Some historians believe ochre was used to summon animals in hunting ceremonies, while others see it as a marker of early shamanic practices. Red ochre, in particular, was associated with life and death. It mirrored the colour of blood and was often applied to the bodies of the dead in burial rituals. Skeletons from Paleolithic graves have been found stained in red, as if painted for a journey beyond. In this way, colour became more than expression. It became memory, protection, and prayer. But ochre wasn't only spiritual. It had practical uses too. When mixed with animal fat or water, it could be used as sunscreen, insect repellent, or a sealant for tools and hides. The same pigments that painted walls also preserved skin and bone, showing how deeply colour was woven into the fabric of daily life. These ancient pigments mark the beginning of art history, a legacy not of words but of vision. Ochre was humanity's first brushstroke, a signal that we were more than animals. We were creators, we were storytellers. And even in darkness we reached for colour to say, we were here. To the ancient Egyptians, colour was never arbitrary. It held power, symbolic, spiritual, and even magical. Every hue in their art, architecture, and ritual objects was chosen with intention, reflecting their complex worldview where the divine and mortal were always intertwined. Among their most important colours were blue and green, tones not easily found in nature, and therefore highly revered. Blue in particular was associated with the heavens, the Nile, and the sacred qualities of life and rebirth. Yet blue pigments were rare in the natural world, so the Egyptians created their own, Egyptian blue, the first synthetic pigment in recorded history. Made by heating a mixture of sand, copper, and calcium in a kiln, this vibrant hue was ground into powder and mixed with water to create a paint used on statues, tomb walls, and even sarcophagi. It wasn't just colour, it was chemistry, ritual, and innovation rolled into one. Green carried similarly potent meaning. It symbolised vegetation, fertility, and eternal life. Osiris, god of the afterlife and resurrection, was often depicted with green skin, a direct metaphor for his role in rebirth and regeneration. The pigment used for green was typically derived from crushed malachite, a copper-rich mineral. The stone was imported from the Sinai and ground into fine powder, then applied to everything from temple walls to the eyes of statues. Malachite was also used cosmetically. Egyptian nobility and priestesses adorned their eyelids with it, believing not only in its aesthetic charm, but in its protective properties. It was thought to ward off evil and to grant strength and clarity of vision, both literally and spiritually. These pigments weren't just decorative. They formed part of Egypt's visual theology. Blue and green adorned amulets, mummy wrappings and religious texts, symbolizing purification, divine presence, and the eternal cycle of life and death. Even in funerary practices, these colours were carefully applied to ensure safe passage into the afterlife. The Egyptians were among the first to bind colour to cosmic order. Their blue wasn't just sky, it was the breath of the gods. Their green wasn't just earth, it was immortality in mineral form. In their hands, colour became both language and talisman, a palette not only for art, but for eternity. In the grand forums of Rome and the gilded halls of Byzantium, colour was more than decoration. It was identity, hierarchy, and control. Among all colours, crimson reigned supreme. Deep, vivid reds were reserved for emperors, priests, and the elite. To wear certain shades was to display power. To create them was a triumph of nature, wealth, and sometimes cruelty. One of the most precious pigments of the ancient world was Tyrian purple, a deep red violet extracted from the glands of the murex sea snail. Harvesting it was laborious and gruesome. Tens of thousands of snails were needed to produce just a few grams of dye. The resulting colour was rich, long-lasting, and pungent during its creation. Because of its cost and scarcity, it became a symbol of imperial power. Roman senators wore purple-edged togas, and emperors eventually claimed exclusive rights to wear it fully, solidifying its role as a visual shorthand for divine rule. As Rome transitioned into the Byzantine Empire, crimson and purple maintained their status, but became even more politically charged. Empresses gave birth in the porphyra, a chamber lined with purple stone, so their children could be declared born in the purple, a phrase that denoted legitimate royal birth. Purple ink was used to write imperial decrees, and possessing or wearing the colour without permission could be considered treason. But while Tyrian purple dominated courtly life, another pigment surged in artistic spaces: vermilion. Derived from cinnabar, a red mercury sulfide mineral, vermilion was ground into a brilliant, slightly orange-red pigment. It became a favourite for wall frescoes, manuscript illuminations, and religious iconography. The Romans used it in frescoes at Pompeii, while Byzantine artists blended it with gold leaf to illuminate sacred texts and icons. Red, in this context, was layered with symbolism: the blood of martyrs, the fire of the Holy Spirit, the passion of Christ, and the might of empire. It glowed in mosaics and manuscripts, shimmered on priestly robes, and blazed from the domes of sanctuaries. In Rome and Byzantium, colour was a system of signs, a language written in pigment and fabric. Crimson didn't just catch the eye, it commanded obedience, marked divinity, and wrapped itself around history like a royal mantle. Across Asia, colour in art was not simply visual, it was deeply symbolic, tied to philosophy, religion, and cosmology. In China, Japan, and India, artists didn't just paint with pigments, they told stories about the universe, the spirit, and human nature. Each hue carried layered meaning, often rooted in sacred texts or elemental belief systems. In ancient China, colour symbolism was governed by the wuxing, or 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, each associated with a direction, a season, and a colour. Green, wood, symbolised growth and spring. Red, fire, stood for joy. And summer, yellow earth, represented centrality and balance, white, metal, signified mourning and purity, and black, water, conveyed depth and the unknown. Artists used mineral pigments like malachite for green, cinnabar for red, azurite for blue, and soot or charcoal for deep blacks. These pigments were ground and bound with animal glue or water for use on silk scrolls, wall murals, and ceramics. In Japan, the Shinto and Buddhist traditions shaped colour usage. Red was a sacred and protective colour, used in torii gates, shrines, and sacred robes. It symbolised life force, expelling evil and drawing good fortune. Indigo, derived from fermented AI plants, became a national staple in textiles and prints, offering both beauty and resistance to insects and decay. Artists in the Edo period used natural pigments for woodblock prints, including beni, safflower red, and gunjo, ultramarine blue, combining aesthetic elegance with symbolic intention. In India, colour was inseparable from spiritual identity. Hindu deities were often associated with specific hues. Vishnu with blue, symbolising infinity, Lakshmi with gold, reflecting wealth and prosperity, and Kali with black, embodying time and destruction. Artists used gulal, coloured powders, mineral-based paints, and vegetable dyes to decorate temples, manuscripts, and textiles. Red, derived from madder or sindoor, signified purity, marriage, and sacrifice, especially in rituals and bridal attire. These Asian traditions didn't treat colour as passive decoration. Each pigment was chosen for its spiritual vibration, its place in nature's cycle, and its ability to communicate truth beyond language. Colour became a portal between the physical and the metaphysical, whether brushed onto scrolls, woven into cloth, or painted onto the bodies of gods. In the East, the spectrum was sacred. In the medieval and Renaissance periods of Europe, no colour carried more mystery, reverence, or cost than blue, especially the rare, deep ultramarine made from ground lapis lazuli. This brilliant stone, mined almost exclusively in the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, became one of the most prized pigments in art history. Transported across dangerous trade routes and more expensive than gold, lapis was ground by hand into powder and mixed with oil or egg tempera to create a glowing blue paint. Ultramarine, meaning beyond the sea. Ultramarine wasn't just a pigment, it was a status symbol. Because of its expense, it was often reserved for the most sacred parts of a painting: the robes of the Virgin Mary, the heavens, or angelic figures. Its use conveyed both spiritual and financial devotion. Patrons who commissioned works featuring ultramarine made clear not only their wealth, but their piety, as placing such precious blue on Mary's robes symbolised divine grace, purity, and heaven itself. The technical preparation of ultramarine was painstaking. Raw lapis lazuli contains impurities, so artists or their assistants would grind the stone, knead it with wax and lye, and wash it repeatedly to extract only the finest pigment. This delicate process made the colour's radiance all the more miraculous. It shimmered with a richness and depth no other blue could replicate. While ultramarine dominated altarpieces and religious panels in Italy and northern Europe, another blue, azurite, was more affordable and widely used, though it lacked the brilliance of lapis. Artists like Giotto, Fra Angelico, and later Michelangelo used both, often layering azurite beneath ultramarine for intensity. The Renaissance also witnessed a growing understanding of light, perspective, and atmospheric colour. Blue began to appear not only in sacred imagery, but in skies, landscapes, and clothing, as a symbol of distance, dignity, and calm. The colour shifted from the purely divine to the emotional, expressing melancholy, mystery, or majesty. Yet even as artists explored new styles and techniques, ultramarine remained a kind of visual gold. It spoke of effort, faith, and the longing to capture the infinite on canvas. In Renaissance art, blue was not just a colour, it was transcendence, powdered and painted by hand. Among the most emotionally charged colours in the history of art, red has always carried weight, of blood, love, rage, sacrifice, and divinity. In the medieval and Renaissance worlds, artists relied on two principal red pigments, vermilion and madder. Each had its own texture, origin, and symbolism, and together they painted the emotional core of countless masterpieces. Vermilion, a vivid orange-toned red, was derived from cinnabar, a naturally occurring mineral made of mercury sulfide. Toxic and precious, cinnabar was mined carefully, crushed, and refined into a pigment so vibrant it seemed to glow. Vermilion was favoured for its intensity and permanence, and it became a staple in illuminated manuscripts, frescoes, and altar paintings. It marked divine presence, sacred blood, and heavenly fire. In Christian iconography, it often appeared in depictions of the crucifixion, the tongues of Pentecost, and the robes of saints and martyrs. In portraits, vermilion highlighted power, the rich reds of cardinals' robes, the flushed cheeks of aristocrats, and the symbolic authority of kings. However, because of its toxicity and cost, it was not always accessible, especially in large quantities. Artists had to use it sparingly and skillfully. Madder, by contrast, was a more humble plant-based pigment. Extracted from the roots of the Rubia tinctorum plant, madder offered a range of reds from soft pinks to deep burgundy, depending on preparation. It was widely cultivated across Europe and Asia, and used not only in painting, but in textiles and dyes. Madder red appeared in tapestries, religious icons, and garments of both commoners and nobility. While madder lacked the brightness of vermilion, it had a warmth that suited human skin tones, natural drapery, and layered symbolism. It represented earthy love, maternal warmth, and, in religious contexts, the human side of the divine. Both reds were used with deep purpose. In Renaissance portraiture, red could signify wealth, passion, or hidden tensions. In devotional art, it bridged heaven and humanity. The layering of red tones created emotional depth, directing the viewer's eye to suffering, majesty, or longing. In the hands of master painters, red was never passive. It pulsed. Whether made from mercury-laced stone or patiently gathered roots, red captured the extremes of the human experience, from sacred to sensual, from royalty to rage. While often overshadowed by the grandeur of reds and blues, yellow played a quiet yet crucial role in the history of art. It symbolized light, divinity, wisdom, and wealth, but also betrayal and decay. This duality gave yellow a strange power. Artists could use it to represent the divine halo of a saint, the richness of embroidered robes, or the cunning of a traitor. From prehistoric caves to Renaissance altarpieces, yellow always spoke, sometimes brightly, sometimes ominously. The earliest yellows came from natural earth pigments like yellow ochre, made from hydrated iron oxide. Mined from the earth and ground into fine powder, it produced a warm, golden tone that was both durable and stable. Used since prehistoric times, ochre was applied in Egyptian tomb paintings, Roman frescoes, and medieval manuscript margins. A more brilliant yellow arrived with orpiment, a vivid, almost neon pigment made from arsenic sulfide. Imported from the East, orpiment dazzled medieval and early Renaissance artists with its intensity. It was used sparingly due to both its toxicity and its incompatibility with other pigments, especially lead-based ones. But when used carefully, orpiment created a golden shimmer that no other natural pigment could rival. It adorned illuminated manuscripts, sacred halos, and the golden fabrics of saints and kings. Later, during the Renaissance, another popular yellow emerged, lead tin yellow. This was a synthetic pigment created by heating a mix of lead and tin oxides. It offered excellent opacity and a soft, buttery tone that blended beautifully with skin tones and sunlight effects. Artists like Titian and Vermeer used it in their warm lighting, glowing gowns, and soft horizon skies. Yellow's symbolism varied across cultures and time. In Christian Europe, golden halos signified divine light and saintly presence. In Chinese imperial art, yellow was the colour of the emperor. associated with the earth element and centrality. Yet yellow could also carry negative weight. Judas Iscariot, in medieval paintings, was often dressed in yellow, a signal of betrayal and moral corruption. Despite its mixed meanings, yellow remained essential. It illuminated the shadows, added radiance to robes, and cast divine light into earthly scenes. Whether drawn from soil or synthesized in fire, yellow helped artists capture the fleeting glow of sunlight, the sacred spark of divinity, and the fragile shimmer of human virtue. While colours like red, blue, and gold dazzled with symbolism and rarity, black and white quietly shaped the very structure of visual art. They were the bones beneath the paint, the origin and the end, the void and the light. To many ancient and medieval cultures, black and white were not merely colours, but ideas. They signified creation and destruction, life and death, purity and the abyss. Black pigments came from a variety of sources, the most common being carbon black, made by burning organic materials like bones, vines, or wood in low-oxygen environments. Soot was collected and mixed with binders to create lamp black, a velvety pigment used in early manuscripts, ink drawings, and religious iconography. Ivory black, made by burning animal bones, added richness and warmth to the pigment, and it was prized by Renaissance and Baroque painters for its subtle depth. Black had different meanings depending on context. In many Christian artworks it symbolized mourning, sin, and the void, the absence of God's light. But it was also used to emphasize contrast, define form, and bring emotional gravity to a scene. In medieval illuminated manuscripts, black ink formed the sacred text, while gold and colour danced around the edges. Black was, in that sense, the foundation of divine expression. White, on the other hand, came from materials such as chalk, gypsum, or lead white, the latter being the most brilliant and most dangerous. Lead white, used extensively from antiquity through the 19th century, provided luminosity and opacity unmatched by other whites. It was the go-to for painting skin tones, highlighting fabrics, and creating the illusion of reflected light. But it was toxic, and prolonged exposure led to illness among artists who mixed their own paints. Symbolically, white represented purity, innocence, and the divine. It adorned angels' robes, marked holy light, and signified spiritual clarity. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, white was linked to mourning and the afterlife, showing the colour's double nature even across cultures. Together, black and white did not simply sit at opposite ends of the spectrum. They framed it. They were used to build contrast, drama, and spiritual resonance. In their interplay, artists found the power to carve form out of void, and to express the most profound mysteries of existence without a drop of colour. The 19th century marked a turning point in the history of colour, a dramatic shift from nature-bound pigments to lab-created hues that forever changed how artists worked and what they could express. This was the era of synthetic colour, born not in quarries or plants, but in chemistry labs. Suddenly, colours that had once been rare and expensive could be mass-produced, cheaper, brighter, and more consistent than ever before. The breakthrough began with Movine, the first synthetic dye, discovered accidentally in 1856 by an 18-year-old chemist named William Perkin. While attempting to create a malaria treatment, Perkin stumbled upon a brilliant purple stain, one that clung to fabric with vibrancy. It wasn't long before industrial chemists applied similar techniques to create synthetic versions of ultramarine, emerald green, alizarin crimson, a replacement for madder, and countless others. Artists were no longer limited by nature. The spectrum expanded. With this newfound freedom, painters began experimenting boldly. The Impressionists, for example, embraced synthetic pigments like chrome yellow, cobalt blue, and viridian. These paints dried faster, mixed more easily, and held their intensity over time. Monet's shimmering landscapes, Renoir's luminous skin tones, and Van Gogh's swirling skies all owed their brilliance to this chemical revolution. Yet not all synthetic pigments were stable or safe. Some, like emerald green, made with arsenic, remained toxic. Others faded quickly or changed colour when exposed to light. But as industrial chemistry advanced, safer and more durable pigments emerged, and artists gained unprecedented control over their palette. The explosion of colour wasn't limited to Europe. In Japan, the Shinhanga print movement embraced imported synthetic dyes to achieve brighter tones than traditional vegetable-based pigments could offer. In India and China, new pigments entered the worlds of textile design and mural painting, blending traditional aesthetics with modern materials. Symbolism also evolved. With colour now more accessible, it became more personal. Blue no longer had to mean heaven. It could be sadness, freedom, or abstraction. Red could still suggest power, but also revolution, passion, or violence. Colour became emotional, psychological, subjective. In the modern world, the story of colour continues to unfold in synthetic hues, digital screens, and industrial paints. What began with crushed beetles and groundstone has become an infinite spectrum, and still, each colour tells a story of culture, chemistry, and the human urge to see and make meaning through light. In ancient Greece, music was not seen as a human invention. It was a divine inheritance bestowed upon mortals by the gods themselves. The Greeks believed music originated in the realm of the sacred, woven into the fabric of the universe. To them, music was not just sound. It was a force that governed nature, educated the mind, and elevated the soul. At the heart of this belief were the Muses, 9 divine sisters born from Zeus, king of the gods, and Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. Each muse presided over a different art or science, and several were directly linked to music. Euterpe was the muse of music and lyric poetry, while Terpsichore inspired dance. Invoking the muses was standard practice before beginning any performance or composition, a reminder that all creative expression came from the divine. Apollo, god of music, prophecy, healing, and light, was perhaps the most important musical figure in Greek mythology. Often depicted holding a golden lyre, Apollo represented the orderly, harmonious side of music, refined, disciplined, and rational. He was the patron of the kithara and the lyre, stringed instruments that conveyed clarity and control. His rival in musical myth was Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and frenzy, associated with the aulos, a reed instrument whose wild, intense sound mirrored the god's chaotic energy. Together, Apollo and Dionysus embodied the dual nature of music, its ability to soothe and stir, to organize and overwhelm. No story captures this divine power more than that of Orpheus. A mortal bard blessed by the gods, Orpheus played the lyre with such beauty that animals gathered to listen, trees bent toward his song, and rivers altered their flow. When his beloved Eurydice died, Orpheus descended into the underworld and softened even Hades with his music, earning a chance to bring her back, a tragic tale of music's power over life, death, and fate. For the Greeks, music was more than art. It was a living force that shaped human behaviour, governed the stars, and echoed the divine harmony of the cosmos. It could educate the young, heal the sick, and connect the mortal to the immortal. Music was, quite literally, a gift from the gods. In the soundscape of ancient Greece, 2 instruments reigned supreme, the lyre and the aulos. Though vastly different in construction and tone, both held deep symbolic meaning and were central to the daily life, rituals, and philosophies of Greek society. Each was tied to a different god, a different way of being, and a different emotional response, reflecting the dual nature of music itself. The lyre was the quintessential Greek instrument, simple in design, yet profound in impact. Made from a tortoise shell, wooden arms, and strings of sheep gut, it was light, portable, and deeply associated with education, poetry, and nobility.